Hrungnir's Heart by Kevin G. Doyle. Prologue. Late 10th century Iceland. The snow was blinding, but he had made the trip several times and knew the route well. His ears were frozen and numb and ached with the howling gale around him. The crashing sound of surf assaulting a familiar cliff face hundreds of yards to his right barely reached his senses. A large dog walked next to him as he led his two small horses up towards 3 stone-walled and sod-covered buildings. The trip had been 7 days of bad weather. He was glad to finally arrive. The buildings were barely more than large, sturdy huts. On a good day, and there weren't many this time of year, they appeared as part of the landscape. The stone walls blended into the hillside, and grass roofs rose out of the adjoining ground like an extension of Odin's creation. From a distance, the few angular surfaces visible were the only thing that would lead you to believe this wasn't a natural formation. An aroma of turf fire, almost lost on the wind, let him know there were people inside, and his mood lifted. Then the dog whined. The man imagined it was due to the biting cold, but looking down he saw the dog raise its hackles. When the whine became a low rumbling growl, he unsheathed his sword, showing absolute trust of the animal's instincts. Putting a finger to his lips to keep the dog quiet, they slowed their approach. He decided to check the larger hut to the left before entering the lodge of his future wife. Even before pulling back the sheepskin-covered door, an odor of stale blood hit him, and his warrior's instinct came full to the surface. It took a moment for his eyes to adjust to the darkness within, but the sight before him brought back the type of rage best left dormant and long forgotten. The bodies of 2 men hung naked, upside down from the ceiling. They showed the plain and distressingly familiar signs of slow tortured death. Fingers and toes laid scattered on the dirt floor. Strips of shriveled skin hung like dried fish from the men who had obviously taken a long time to die. He recognized the method. It was one used in a life left behind, and he realized the type of enemy he was up against. There was no time to cut his friends down. It would wait until those responsible were dead. Back outside, the dog understood they were on a hunt now. It struck an instinctive hound's pose, head down, eyes narrowing with anticipation. He tied the 2 horses to a post in the lee of the hut. They would have to wait there until he finished the job at hand. The dog and his master circled around to the barn with wind and snow muffling the sound of their footsteps. He whispered thanks to Freya for the favor. Motioning the dog to stay back so as not to cause a commotion from the sheep and the horses inside, he looked and found nothing out of order. Then walking back to the lodge, where he had hoped to find 2 women still alive, he pointed to a spot a few feet from the door. The dog recognized the signal from his training. It went to the spot and lay down in perfect stillness, letting the wind build snow up around him. Listening carefully at a small window, which was shuttered against the storm, he heard another man's voice. His heart sank with the recognition of it. Loud but controlled, the voice called for an answer. "We do not know," a young woman's defiant but shaken voice yelled back. "Leave my mother alone. She will be the next to die if you do not give me what I want." The intruder's manner was calm and betrayed no distaste for the killings that had already taken place. He listened carefully and realized there were no other voices to be heard. Only one man to kill, and he would do it with little regret. Swinging the door open, he showed himself to the killer inside but did not enter. The older woman was naked. Matted strands of long hair were glued to her face from bleeding, brought on by what must have been a strong blow to the side of her head. Her hands were bound behind her, and her feet hung from a rope wrapped around a roof beam, but she wasn't completely off the ground yet. The younger woman was directly to the killer's left, her hands bound, but she was standing. The look on her face changed from one of anger to serene detachment on the sight of the man outside, who slowly backed away into the white gale without a word. The intruder, not particularly surprised at the sudden interruption, grabbed the younger woman, held a sword to her neck. "Come back here! I will open her throat!" No answer. Snow blew through the door, which banged an insistent tantrum against the side of the lodge. The man outside was there, but barely visible in the swirls of white. The intruder moved forward with practiced caution, hoping that what he was searching for had just arrived. He held the young woman tight in front of him, his weapon pressing against her neck. Stepping through the door, he checked his flanks. No one else there, only drifting snow, and he sensed no other threat. The quiet man outside was 3 sword lengths in front of him, a safe enough distance to spew another threat from. "Do you want your woman to die, or will you just stand there?" Again, no answer. "Drop your sword, or she dies." The man outside smiled, but didn't drop his weapon. Instead, he pointed it to the ground. When the tip of his sword came to rest in the snow, the dog launched at the intruder from his plain sight hiding place, knocking him face down to the ground. The girl fell in the opposite direction, reaching for her neck. The dog went to her protection, leaving the intruder for his master to deal with. From his stomach, the intruder rolled over, holding his sword up in defense, but it shattered from a blow delivered by his former friend. Then he felt a cold blade against his own throat. "Where is it?" the intruder hissed in defiance. The quiet man finally spoke. "I pray to Odin I would never have to kill again," he said while kicking the hilt of the broken sword out of the intruder's hand. The intruder reached out for it, only to have the crushing weight of the victor's foot step on his wrist. "No, I deny you your sword. The joys of Odin's hall will not be yours. Instead, I hope hell welcomes you with pain." The sword drove through the intruder's neck, his disbelieving eyes filled with death and the weapon he desperately wanted to hold. After a brief, gurgled spit, it was over. The victor turned and hurried to the young woman, who was wounded but not badly. They went inside, untied the older woman, and wrapped her in woolen blankets. She was bruised about the face, but by Freya's grace still had all her teeth. Physical ache would remain for days. Grief had barely begun. Stepping back outside, he dragged the dead man to the edge of a cliff. Snow disguised its height, but the crashing surf far below was now more audible above the gale. "I give him to Uran. Annihilate his body and destroy his soul." He threw the body over. It disappeared into the upwelling snow without a sound.